Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to both authors for very interesting papers and presentations. I think that both papers show that that there are these long-term negative implications of the higher prevalence of fixed-term contracts in terms of less working hours during the future career, lower wages. On the other hand, there is this higher probability of getting any job at the beginning, at the entry of the labor market, but it doesn't convert into more solid employment relationships in the future. And there is link to this, and this is the paper which focus on impact on fertility, that it's this instability of employment which results in delaying decisions to have first child, and then in the lower number of children in general. I will not comment on the econometric methodology and regressions. I mean, they are, for me, because the results are in agreement with, first, my intuition, and the second with anecdote evidence which we have all on these issues. I believe that. Although I'm a econometrician by education, but since a long time I lost actually belief in econometrics to a large extent. But I think the problem is we don't have any other solution that to use this type of analysis to try to find the impacts of different statuses in employment, because the economic model, theoretical model we have are not explain, they are not good enough, or they are too far from reality to explain the behavioral changes on the side of the employees and the employers. I think it's very important that there are, in these two cases, longitudinal data available, because they are crucial for this type of analysis, and it's equally important that there is a possibility to match this longitudinal data from the surveys with the data from Social Security records. And I think in case of Poland, we still are quite far from such a possibility to do it, and maybe that's one of the reasons in what Jan Natorowicz explained, that we have difficulties in saying what the animal is. My further comments are partly, related to the papers and to the topic of this session, and to the attempts in this very ambitious attempt in the program of this day, which was to show what are the causes of duality at the labor market and what are the consequences, and then in the afternoon we will discuss what should be the policy responses. From the first session, unfortunately we didn't learn much about what are the causes of the duality in the labor market. And here I think we also looked a bit too narrowly, and this is not critique of the papers, this is critique maybe of the state of research on the issue and the data availability, etc. Because to grasp the size and the implications of the problem, we should look much broader than just fixed-term contracts, because these atypical forms of employment are much broader phenomenon than just fixed-term contracts. And this was, again, Jan Natorowicz said something about these other forms which also exist in other countries. And there there is this issue of what is and what is not employment relationship and what is its quality. And there is a lot in the ILO where I worked for many years. There is a lot of discussions on this between especially workers and employers, and there are very different views of both sides in this area. This recommendation, ILO recommendation on employment relationship was adopted several years ago, but with the votes of governments and the workers, and against the votes of employers. There was no consensus very far. Employers are still contesting this recommendation. Then there is question of looking at characteristics of these different atypical forms of employment, what they are in terms of what we can call quality of employment, measures of decent work, quality jobs, good jobs, etc. There are many terms used around by different institutions in this. And looking at quality in terms of levels of workers' protections, social security coverage, etc. Another thing, these consequences the authors looked at are very important, of course, in terms of welfare of the workers and their families. But I think there are other long-term consequences it would be interesting to look at in this session. For example, one is it seems that employers tend to move to these lower quality jobs because they are driven by kind of a short-term concerns and think that the way to achieve to be competitive is to lower the labor cost. But in the longer run, and there are studies on this, that this may result in losses in human capital, productivity, value of the firm, and its competitiveness in the long run. And I think it would be interesting to look at these consequences. One of my main fields is social security and pensions. So I would like to add here, I think, the importance of looking at social security coverage, because these atypical forms of employment usually are less covered or uncovered completely by social security. And here we have, I think, very important policy incoherence in Europe, because on the one hand we have this call for to stimulate more elasticity in the labor market, which results in more atypical employment, less covered by social security. And at the same time, we have pension reforms, which actually promise more or less adequate pensions only after very long, unbroken formal employment careers. And so we are kind of producing through this policy incoherence in the future a group of people which in the old age will have no prevention against falling into poverty other than social assistance. So that's the few points I wanted to make. It's again, it's more about what is missing in the session than about the papers, which were, as I want to repeat once again, very, very interesting, and I would be very happy to read not just the PowerPoints, but the papers itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now let us move to it's brilliant. Now we are in front of the agenda, so it's really a rare situation in Poland. So it happens like last time it happened was 1998, I think. So I would like to open the floor for the discussion, and so feel free to post the comments. Michał, maybe to begin.
Hi, my name is Michał Myk. I'm from the Center for Economic Analysis. I have a question to Jose concerning the data that you use, the administrative data. Does that data set cover everyone, or only those who are employed at some point? Because if it misses those who are never employed, then of course, well, the question is, do you really address the question of do you really cover the people who never get employment in the old system with flexible hours?
Yes. Well, as I said, the data set, the sample selection is among those workers, those individuals who has been in connection to Social Security for at least 1 day during the period 2007 to 2012. This is the main reason why we have native males, because native males in their 40s, they usually have some work in connection to Social Security. So the sample selection issue is more a problematic issue with females, for example, or with immigrants who maybe have entered into Spain in the 90s. So all those individuals, native males in Spain, who has been at least 1 day in connection means working or receiving benefits or whatever, with Social Security during the period 2007 to 2012, they are in the sample.
Herwig, Imervol, and then Johan.
Thank you, Herwig Imervol from the OECD. I liked both papers very much, so thank you. Just some questions on Jose's paper. I think this RDD design is very nice, and it's also very intuitive to be able to show what has happened before and after 1984. And I think the result is very powerful. I mean, if I understand well, it's 300 days less of work over a long period of time. So I think it's in line with the results that we get from other evaluations of changes in EPL that show that overall employment, although that is the justification for such reforms, overall employment actually doesn't go up. So I have two questions about the particular design of the RDD methodology. One is, I mean, of course, that was a big change in 1984, but other big changes happened in Spain during this period with EU membership and so on. What is how do you see that impacting on the results, or were you able to sort of filter that out? Because one could think that at some distance to the left or the right of your RDD cutoff point, that these other changes may impact on your comparison. And another question is one that comes up I think in all these type of studies, is how fuzzy is your cutoff point, and let's say for the hiring decision, for instance, at what point were employers already able to expect the change and therefore possibly shift hiring to after 1984 that they would have otherwise done, and how would that impact on the result? And another more completely different, more broad just remark really is that the very large impact that you find, especially if we compare it to the results that we've heard in the first session, because in a sense the reform that you look at can be seen as a reduction in firing costs overall, and we have seen very very small impacts of such a reform if one looks at a sort of a more general equilibrium model, and that contrasts with very large impacts that you find. So that's maybe just something for further discussion. Thank you.
Okay, I will try to answer. Other changes affecting, of course, you can always think of something happening. The identification comes from comparing basically those beginning working in 1985 and those beginning working in 1983, 84. So it's just some months. So we are quite sure that the identification is quite clear. But there are other changes affecting. Yes, the most important one is the change in the minimum age, in the minimum working age. In Spain, it was changed in 1980, 4 years before. And this is the main reason why we have the second methodology. With the second methodology, controlling for potential experience, we are actually taking into account the real experience in the labor market for those guys in each year of their career. So we guess, and the results are a little bit lower, but are continue being quite negative. Regarding the second question, I have to expected change. The second question, could you repeat?
If employers were able to foresee this.
Yeah. Well, as far as I know, I was quite young in the 80s. As far as I know, it was totally unexpected. So as we are comparing, the running variable is year of birth. So it could be some. This is the reason why we don't use 1984. Those who began working in 1984, the 1968 cohort, we are not using this because this is the change in regime. In this year, could be something like what you are suggesting. And finally, the reduction in firing cost in 1984 was for some workers. This is quite important. It was not a total reduction for all workers. All the insiders were unaffected. So it was a change only for new entrants. And this is the reason why the effect is larger among those who were entering in the labor market, but not as a whole. This is not the result for the whole Spanish labor market. It's just for the young workers beginning working in those periods. Thank you for your comments.
I would like to second Herving on saying that these two papers were absolutely great. But I still have one question, technical, or two, for Wolfgang actually. The first one is, you do a probit of me getting a children 1 year from graduation, me getting a kid 2 years from graduation, and so on. I mean, it begs for survival analysis. You must have some reason for not doing it, but you also, I would like to see you more explicit on explaining why these estimates are not the ones we would like to see. So this was question number one. And question number two is, I understand you do an analysis on women because they're more interesting. I fully support that motivation, but
the results are more interesting.
But what isn't clear to me is, how do you actually identify those women that you have by your first or entry temporary contract? What I'm trying to say is, it's possible that there's a variety of scenarios. One of the bats is, I get my first job as a temporary contract, I lose it, I get another one as a temporary contract, I lose it, I get another one as a temporary contract, I get discouraged, I get married, I get children. I'm out of labor force, but you only look at how long it took me to get children. Now, the alternative scenario is, I really want to get children. So the first time I look for a job, I maybe wait a little bit longer, and I maybe accept a little bit lower wage, and maybe also slightly less appealing job profile, but I want a permanent contract because I want to get pregnant and I want to get my kids out as soon as I can. And I understand your identification for causality, that this thing happened before and that thing happened after, but they could still have those different motivations and adapt the labor market entry mode to these motivations. And I would really like to hear from you, how do you think your research addresses that?
Okay, so I start with the first question, to the survival analysis question. We were thinking about doing a survival analysis, but we were really motivated by looking how the effect changes over time and how long does it last. And I don't know if it's really possible to look at this with a survival analysis. If it's possible, then we can maybe talk about this in the lunch break. And if we could do really the same thing with the survival analysis, then what we are doing here. And the second question, if I got this right, you ask how we control for things which happen after entering the labor market, or is this not what you are actually pointing at?
I'm saying that the first contract will already be indicative of your inclinations and what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's the
Fertility and other things.
Okay, so that means that individuals who have, women who have a really high preference for fertility try to select into permanent contracts. So search as long as they get a permanent contract. Okay, yeah, so this might be definitely a problem for our identification strategy. So if there's already a selection on the point of entering the labor market, because they search as long as they get, as they find a permanent contract there. No, we cannot control for this problem, yeah. So, but I don't...
Subsequent inactivity, do you control for subsequent inactivity?
No. So what that would mean is that we look at what's happening directly before entering the labor market. So how long were they searching for a job until they find one, no matter which type of the contract it was. But it would be possible that if you have a really high preference for children, then you are searching really long, really intensively. Yeah, but no, we cannot control for this, or we do not control for this at the moment. So it would be interesting to have some more information what is happening before labor market entry, and that would make our results more robust if we have some controls for the search behavior before entering. Okay, that's a really good comment. Thank you.
May I ask one?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So it's kind of related because actually, because you were saying that there is this fixed term start, but maybe I missed it because it's behind me, the slides. But what do you really mean by start? I mean, how long? The first slide I showed today in the morning is that there are countries where 90% of new hires are fixed term contracts. But the question is that probably some people after 3 months will move to open-ended contract, and the other people stay on temporary, on a more or less permanent basis. And probably the outcomes for them are rather different, also from the point of your interest. So how do you define that? What does it mean to start with the fixed term? And if I'm fixed term for a month, do I start with the fixed term of open-ended? And are you able to sort of play with that span of what is the start? To check how different the
Unfortunately,
results are.
we are not able to distinguish how long the spell or how long the fixed term contract actually was. So we only have data on yearly basis. So we only have a 1 or a 0 for 1 year, and so the data actually at the moment is not good enough to really distinguish who is in a fixed term contract for 3 months, as you said, or for 2 years. So we are trying to get better data where we have monthly information about the labor market status, and then it would be possible to really control or at least analyze subsamples of individuals who just have a approbation time of 3 months and then they get a permanent contract, and some individuals who going from one contract to another and really are in this trap of repeated fixed-term contracts. But at the moment, we are not able to do this.
Can I do one more?
Yeah.
Positions from temporary to permanent, it would be useful to check if that's a good predictor of fertility. So, like, how well does it correlate? So you will have a lot of people transferring from temporary to permanent, young women of a certain age. Now, is that a good predictor of disappearing from the labor market because of fertility or not? If that's a good predictor, then you don't even have to go beyond because it already kills your paper. If it's a poor predictor, then you're done.
Okay.
Jan Rutkowski.
Thank you. I have a question to Wolfgang Auer, which goes a little bit beyond the topic of your presentation. First of all, a very interesting presentation, but I was very much impressed by the quality of your data, by the richness of your data. You have the number of variables that I usually considered unobservables, especially personality traits. And my question is, did you look, maybe not within the scope of this particular research project, but in related research, on how personality traits, or let me put it this way, whether or not employers use personality traits, this big five, in making a decision of what kind of contracts to grant to people, whether they discriminate between, let's say, extroverts and introverts, people who are agreeable and not. Thank you.
I probably have the answer. I don't know if you can see this, but
yeah, we'll do a full screen.
But actually, this is.
I know that is trying to control for the selection problem, but this is slightly different.
Yeah, but okay. So if I understood the question correctly, then you ask: is the probability of having of starting the career for fixed-term contract higher if you have special traits?
Right.
And it's not the case, but I think you can't read it. But here are openness, agreeableness, and all the other big five indicators. And there's one agreeableness, there's some correlation, but all the other traits are not correlated with the probability of starting the career with fixed-term contract. So they are actually not a good indicator or a good predictor of or a good explanatory variable for the type of the first contract. So it doesn't seem that firms are selecting different type of individuals into this contract.
But if I understand correctly, that's part good, part bad news, because that also means that they might, because you use them to control for the other decisions that are being made, in particular the fertility, and if it turns out that they don't really don't really impact the allocation of people into various kinds of jobs, very probably the information in these variables also for other, let's say, selection issues might be limited, right?
It may have a higher impact on subsequent contracts.
Yes.
The temporary contract you can afford almost to hire anyone. You use it to screen.
Yeah.
On those big fives, in the first period, the first contract will give you information on non-cognitive skills and all the kind of issues that in an interview you probably don't get enough information. So
Yes.
it may impart on the decision to grade you, to upgrade you from a temporary to a permanent, which is then with limit.
Yep. May I ask another one? If everyone's fine with it. So I have a question to Jose. Like I've seen a presentation a few weeks ago. It was at the conference in Brussels that Spain during the Great Recession is not only struggling from high unemployment but also from very strong carousel effects. So people who are getting a job just for a few months to get the unemployment benefit again. And as the institutions have some inertia, that might also be the case basically over the entire 80s, 90s, or whatever. I don't know the country that well. So it might be that some, let's say, lower total employment span of people who are fixed term employed is also some kind of matter of choice, because they use the work as a way to get some benefits. So are you able to control for that and check how if it's a valid argument to wonder if they just get a fixed term contract to get an unemployment benefit after that. That's my one question. And the other is that if it's a social security data, then relating to what Krzysztof Hagemejer said, that in pension systems like Poland, which is right now defined contribution, there is a more or less one-to-one relation between how much you work, how much you put into the system, how much you get. I don't know the Spanish system that well, but are you able to check what are also the the differences in future pensions implied by the differences in careers by two different groups that you study, because that also might show some additional areas of concern for policy, if in particular if the pensions of these groups are very low and they have to be subsidized from the general taxation in the future.
Okay. Yeah. Regarding unemployment benefit use, it's totally like you say. In fact, before 1992 in Spain, being working 6 months means having access to unemployment benefits for 3 months. So it was, in fact, the first reform of unemployment benefit was in 1992 in order to fight against this vicious cycle of using temporary contracts and unemployment benefit. But look, both groups were using the same. I mean, the basic difference among these two groups is that just they began working just 1 year before. But since 1994 until 92, both were using the same. Mm-hmm. The key point is that entering with a permanent contract make them working more. So I think this is the answer to the first question. The second point is very, very important. For the moment, we have not done anything about this, but I agree with the discussion, this is critical. In fact, the big recession we have been suffering since 2007 till basically last year have put out of the labor market more than 1 million people with temporary contracts. For the pension system until 2010 was not so problematic because the Spanish pension system was considering only the last 15 years of your career. But now, for example, it's considering the last 25 years. I'm quite sure that in a couple of years we will be considering the whole labor market career. So in this new framework, this is going to be very problematic. So, of course, and this data set is very convenient for analyzing these issues because you have the complete labor market since the beginning until retirement. So you can compute exactly the number of days they have been paying taxes. So it's the most appropriate data set to analyze these issues, and this has to be done. It's a very interesting way of research for near future.
Anyone else?
Hello, I'm Ekaterina Novitska from Vilnius University. Thank you very much for the presentations. Both were very interesting. I have one kind of clarification and one question for the second presenter. And maybe I just missed it out. I just wanted to ask, within your controls, I understood that you controlled for many characteristics. Have you also controlled for the employment of the spouse, of the partner for women? So to the previous comment, there might be self-selection, but also which could lower their effect. But on the other hand, if there is some effect coming from the spouse who might be on permanent contract, it could mean that your effects are kind of a lower bound. And the second question is about the policy implications. And what you've mentioned, or maybe I misunderstood it, was that as a policy recommendation, you say that probably lowering the income protection for the whole population would be fair to equalize kind of the effect. But don't you think that maybe because those on the temporary contract have a penalty, the social security system could be used to kind of mitigate this negative effects, and on the contrary, the policy implication would be to strengthen the protection for those on the temporary contract to kind of make the flexicurity work?
Okay, so to the first question, We don't control for partner characteristics in the tables I showed you, but we have some robustness checks where we also include information about the partner. We have information about the partner, and we also have information about the type of the contract of the partner. And yeah, we can include this, and it doesn't change our results. So there is still, even if you have a partner who has a permanent contract and earns a lot of money, you still suffer as a woman from this uncertainty in your contract or in your labor market position. And the second question to the policy implications. Okay, so this is, I mean, it's not a really easy question for me to answer. What is the best policy now? We know what are the negative or the spillover effects of starting a career for a fixed-term contract. And I mean, from my point of view, it seems that from the firm side, they always demand lower firing costs and more flexibility in the workforce and so on. And I think that some of the policies are meant to lower the firing costs and make the workforce more flexible. And from that point of view, so if you really try to make it easier to hire and fire individuals or to make it less costly, then I would say it makes sense to equalize the burden or to make it more equal across the subgroups of permanent and temporary employees. And now it's the case that, from my perspective, that only the fixed-term employees have to carry the burden because they have worse labor market outcomes and also lower health and fertility outcomes. And I think it's not really fair to put the burden on just this group of individuals.
Thank you. Is there anyone else interested in asking a question or commenting on the earlier session where we have a very limited time? We still have 15 minutes to lunch, so it's not that sweet that I will say now there are no more comments so we can get food. We still have 15 minutes, so we can stop now and just have a short break and meet you all in 15 minutes for lunch. Or if there are any questions, that's the last time there are some questions.
Stanisław Adamczyk, Warsaw School of Economics. I'm very glad to be here and listen to the presentations. But from my perspective, the one point is missing. The reason standing behind the scene, the global flow of capital and the lack of balance in bargaining power between global firms, local firms, global capital, working class. This is the main problem of the modern world. So we should address this in this discussion. It is my perspective as a fund manager and investment banker in one of the global corporations. So it is the real reason for this problem of the society, the split of risk between the firms and the working class. Who should bear the risk? We see that in the modern era of the capitalism, we have profits of the big global firms and unemployment in the society. So this is the main focal point, I think. So please discuss about that. Thanks.
Should I, or anyone feels the urge to I think that the coexistence, Marcel? Yeah. Yeah. Please take a mic so the translation works.
I don't know how things are in Poland, but when we discuss things like duality in Spain, people tend to focus very much on the height of firing costs and especially redundancy pay. And so what is typically ignored is the fact that legal workers should have a right
to the protection against unfair dismissals. If a young woman is on a permanent contract, an open-ended contract, it's very hard under most legislations to fire her when she's pregnant, right? It would be an anti-discrimination suit, and she would likely win. Now, if you're a young woman and you're in a temporary contract, they let your contract die, right? So now imagine a temporary contract without any redundancy pay. That contract still offers an enormous, an open-ended contract with zero redundancy pay. Simply legal control on violations of workers' rights. That situation is still highly preferable to a situation where you have temporary contracts with no redundancy pay. This arbitrary limit on the use or the length or the number of renewals of temporary contracts, that's the highly damaging aspect of temporary contract. It's not so much whether you get redundancy pay or not. It is the fact that firms use this contract because it offers them more flexibility, but then it has this arbitrary limit on its duration, and that's very tough on young women. And in fact, we see this in Spain, any measure in order to help women combine family life and work life backfires on them, because firms know that they will have to grant them these rights in permanent contracts. So you give women a right to reduce their hours. What happens is they get hired less, and even less on permanent contracts. So I kind of like, what I like in this session is that we go beyond thinking about salaries or employment. Temporary contracts on youth and on women have effects that go much beyond what is simply a period of precarious employment. So I think it's good to move beyond these narrow limits. So I like both papers a lot. I have no comment on the econometrics though.
Oh yeah. So and reacting to your, I think that's not the first time of humanity that that profits of corporations coexist with unemployment. So it's basically that's how it works. And in a way, I would agree that to some extent it is about the bargaining power. I don't really think that it is that clear, even if you look at the data on temporary employment, for example, in Poland. You really don't see huge, let's say, if it was by the global market forces, by a capital looking for another green pasture, you would expect that it's mainly bigger firms employing on temporary jobs or on precarious contracts. But in practice, you see that what Joanna showed on the slide with the sector, with the industry structure of civil law contracts in particular, you can see that they are very often used by relatively small companies, the temporary jobs, in general in Poland, and also in many cases, both the temporary jobs and the civil law contracts in Poland are implemented in the sectors which are non-tradable sectors. It's various types of services, all kinds of stuff. So it's tough to explain the phenomenon by the globalization or the global flows of capital if the huge part of it happens in an economy which is basically not subject to international competition, right? So we should look also, to high extent, we should look at some internal forces which are in play, which make a lot of services firms, small services firms, employing workers on civil law contracts, whereas you can get a multinational and maybe the rules are a bit different. Of course, the multinationals in Poland are also applying that kind of strategies, but it's more often temporary work agencies. So the multinationals are not really employing workers on temporary jobs or in particular civil law contracts that often. They rather contract this low-skilled labor very often from temporary work agencies, right? So the strategy is a bit different. The motive is maybe probably the same, but the strategy is a bit different. But the fact that is very often the sectors or the occupations which are not subject to international competitions make me think more about things, if we go beyond labor market regulations, then why not to talk about technology? I mean, what's happening in the US for like 20 years is a job polarization. So it's the, let's say, annihilation of the middle class jobs. There is fewer and fewer middle-skilled jobs and more highly skilled and very low-skilled jobs. And you don't see that process happening to that extent in Poland or in other European countries. It is less advanced. But what you can see if you look on this, you can see that the growth of temporary employment in Poland was to a large extent related, or it happened to a large extent in these occupations which are usually affected by the polarization hypothesis. And it also happens in the media. So technology is also pushing some people out of the market, and their bargaining power decreases. Thus, they end up working on temporary junk contracts or whatever, how they call them in Poland. And it doesn't have to be clearly related to international capital flows in play. It might be just an internal way of adapting a technology, for example.
Let's have a closer look to the bargaining power. If we take a report, for instance, International Labour Organization, and the chart, the share of the wages in the GDP for the last 20 years, what can we see? The decreasing amount. The second point, the big international firms are governed by the shareholder value doctrine. So they imposes the rules of the game locally on the small local firms. So if local firms should adapt this cost-cutting rule, the employees are treated as a cost and a risk. So who should pay for the risk of the business activity? This is the main fundamental point about the limits of the putting the risk on the society. Thank you.
I mean, before I get... Where? Do you want? Yeah, please.
No, I was just trying to answer to this because these differences in bargaining power is also a consequence of these dual labor markets. As Marcel has said, in Spain, having 1/3 of the working population with this type of contract means having no bargaining power at all. We have 2/3 with a quite large bargaining power, and another third with no bargaining power at all. The evolution of the average is not so important. What is important is the evolution of what has happened with the bargaining power of temporary contract versus temporary workers versus permanent workers. So the key issue from my point of view is to reduce the influence of these new ways of organizing labor. So the key issue is making more people from this side to go to the other side. But in this sense, we need a change in rules. I mean, if we don't change the rules of permanent contracts, we will continue having, for example, in Spain, every month we have 95 contracts, 95 out of 100 temporary contracts, and just 5, 6 permanent contracts. So we need to change in order to get more people from this side to the other side. And this is also very important for productivity and for how people can negotiate with their firms. The construction bubble in Spain is not the reason of the crisis. The reason why we were specialized in construction in low qualified jobs was because of the temporary contracts so spread across the population. So we have in Spain firms specialized on this type of contracts, and what they do was just do very, very low qualified jobs because they have no incentives to invest in human capital, both firms and workers. So we have to go out of this way if we want to have more equal bargaining power. But I agree that bargaining power is so unequal distributed, but it's even more or less well distributed among workers, within the group of workers, than it is fair from my point of view.
Yeah, and just a short reaction, like as you said, yeah, like let's have a a multinational company which has to maximize earnings per share and earnings per worker. For them, it is very profitable to shed the low qualified labor, contract them from temporary work agencies because they are not on the wage bill then, and it also it all looks better for the investors in the US, for example, right? I mean, but the important question is how that kind of spill into companies with 10 workers, 15 workers working on services, how that kind of, let's say, approach kind of like spills over for across the entire economy, right? Because for them, they are not listed on the Wall Street to maximize earnings per share and earnings per worker. Joanna?
So the flexibility to fire and the form of a contractual agreement. But there's also like hours flexibility, wages flexibility, and so. So the real question, I think, is not really permanent or temporary or civil, non-civil, whatever. It's seeing the unintended consequence of any change in one particular segment of the labor force or labor market legislation to the others. In Poland, you cannot lower wages. Once you offer a higher wage in a contract, you cannot lower wages without actually firing the worker. It's the worker's goodwill, whether he or she accepts a lower wage or prefers severance payment and seeking other employment. And that implies, of course, that there's absolutely no way you can adjust payroll other than by firing people in the moment of a negative demand shock. And that's an obvious thing. So you would think it's a terrible thing for business, there's no way they can solve it. Well, actually, they found a way to solve it, which is they offer flexible components of wages. They offer relatively low wages on contracts and a relatively large part of bonus. And that bonus gives them a cushion. If there's a negative shock, they can adjust downwards without changing contracts. Now, this is a situation which, just an example of a situation which shows that there's absolutely no way we can force firms to take all the risk. And even if you put all the things you want on a contract, or on labor code, they're going to find the ways to regulate the relationship between workers and firms in a more flexible way, because that's what is needed in the current world. The only, I think, problem or the question to keep in the back of our heads is that these contracts with flexible wages or with flexible component of compensation became very popular when business was very good and everybody expected high bonuses. They didn't expect the crisis to happen, so they didn't expect that cushion to actually hurt them. The question is if the workers who have experienced this negative shock in earnings will be as willing to adopt such contractual agreement in the future, and we need to wait and see. But in practice, if workers are willing to accept such contracts, there's no way we can eliminate each and every one from the law, because it's always like we give an offer and then they can find a solution, and one offer, one solution, and it's the same thing as a hacker and administrator of a network game. It's not the way we want to go this around. So maybe the way Jose has framed it, equalize bargaining position for everybody rather than preserve bargaining position for the some, is the only way to go.
Thank you very much for this session and for great presentations and the very vibrant discussion. I would like to invite you for lunch, and let's meet here at 3 for the last session today, which will be about policy implications, proposals, and things like that. So something interesting finally.